Sitting here today, we are all extraordinarily lucky to live in an era of transformative therapies that can treat and potentially cure diseases that have plagued us for decades. So now that all sounds great, but the question that should keep you up at night is this: what if our approach to science and the medicines that result from it is completely wrong? For about a decade, scientists have harnessed the use of a special type of master stem cells called induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs for short. So now for you Lord of the Rings fans out there, it might be easier to think of iPSCs as the one cell to rule them all. And that remarkably, these master stem cells, which can be made from anyone from just a bit of blood, can generate an unlimited supply of any cell or tissue type in the body. So researchers have spent a ton of time in the lab using these cells to create disease models, so-called diseases in a dish, and they have been very successful in doing so. So an overarching paradigm in science is, of course, to develop a disease model and then come up with a treatment for the disease in question. So this is big, bold science, but it also uncovers an unanswered question and a potential fundamental flaw in our thinking surrounding healthcare. And that is focusing on disease the right choice? So we're all part of a healthcare system that is built upon the treatment of chronic disease rather than the prevention of disease itself. We train our next generation of scientists and clinicians to recognize anomaly, to treat and counsel patients only at system-critical time points when something's really wrong, instead of focusing on things like health and longevity. And yes, therapies really have begun to move from the bench to the bedside, but this process has been very slow and fraught with missteps. So drug discovery is extremely expensive and time-consuming, and many of the treatments for things like Alzheimer's disease have produced very disappointing results with no clinical or therapeutic utility. So what must be considered in this scenario is that once a disease has manifested itself, then potential treatments might be ineffective or not work at all. So what we want to do is completely flip this equation on its head. And instead of focusing on disease, what if we instead investigated resilience, which can be defined as our ability to robustly respond to insult or injury? So the hypothesis here is, just as we know that there are genes that drive disease and disorder, then there must also be mechanisms that drive resilience or resistance to disease. So perhaps the best example of this type of resilience is in centenarians, or those that live to 100 years or more. So these extraordinary individuals exemplify exceptional longevity, increased health span, and they really do provide a blueprint for healthy longevity. So hearkening back to the Lord of the Rings stem cell approach, we can make iPSCs from centenarians and their offspring, and then these cells can be used to make a centenarian in a dish. So we can investigate the methods, mechanisms, and strategies that these hyper-specialized individuals use to delay and sometimes completely avoid aging-related disease. So how does this work? As an example, an unlimited number of brain cells or neurons can be made, and then these cells can be exposed to a series of stressors, like the ones that we experience on a daily basis. And then importantly, we can compare how these exceptional individuals respond in comparison to mere mortals, or those of us without any history of longevity. So the million-dollar question is, what allows centenarians to be seemingly impervious to aging-related decline? Let's investigate this together. So first, they upregulate genes that are involved in something called neurogenesis, or the birth of new neurons, as well as genes that interrogate proteins and make sure they are built and work properly. So in other words, centenarians can potentially regenerate their existing neurons, or maybe even make new ones. And they have elite mechanisms to interrogate and eliminate potential disease-causing proteins, like those that actually lead to cognitive decline. Now, let's also perform an experiment in which we assess the function of these cells in the dish, allowing us to compare the performance of centenarian cells to normal individuals. I think you'll agree that what the data shows is quite astounding. So first, using live cell imaging, what we can do is monitor the firing of individual neurons in a dish. This method demonstrates that centenarian neurons have more stable activity and reduced background noise. Basically, better performance and less overall discord and disarray. Remember your high school biology and what you learned about mitochondria, the powerhouses of your cells? Well, centenarian neurons also operate in a more energy-efficient state with reduced hyperactivity. So less energy, really? If you met these individuals, that might seem antithetical because they're so energetic and robust. But this adaptation highlights a parallel strategy employed by other long-lived mammals, like the bowhead whale, which can live to over 250 years. So these features highlight a shared strategy of conserving energy and minimizing damage in the steady state, but preserving robust adaptive capacity when stress arises. So your next question might be, is all this just an aberration of these model systems that we're working on, or do they have general applicability across systems and disease states? Well, if we look at the molecular underpinnings of centenarian neurons, they are far more similar to healthy aging brains than to those impacted by Alzheimer's disease. And these resiliency signatures are more strongly associated with reduced cancer risk. So centenarians really are wonders of the world. Imagine 100 years or more of escapades and entertainment, all done in good cognitive and functional health. Exercising your right to vote at 110, maybe breaking the skydiving age record at 106. We all have a universal desire to age well. But odds and the genetic lottery dictate that, unfortunately, we probably aren't going to be centenarians ourselves. But perhaps what we can do, our call to action, is to be more centenarian-like. So to start, don't smoke, exercise, employ reasonable lifestyle choices, prod your doctor to treat you when you're feeling good. Instead of practicing disease medicine, practice preventative medicine. And perhaps we can all work together to shift our focus away from disease to instead embolden resilience. And perhaps, just perhaps, there is a role for iPSC master stem cell modeling of things like aging and longevity, where these systems can be used to identify new biomarkers of aging, or perhaps to employ preclinical screening of novel therapeutics aimed at increasing your longevity or extending your health span and combating aging-related disease. So the idea is we can develop novel therapeutics, geroprotectors, to increase your resiliency and your health span. Think of this as sort of a clinical trial in a test tube, where in a very personalized way, we find these geroprotectors that will increase your resilience, and we do so using your very own cells by creating you in a dish. Thank you.